that had ruled the galaxy for 11,000 years. They were the oldest species still alive, the most powerful civilization that had ever existed, and they knew it. Their empire stretched across 9 spiral arms, covering more than 2 million star systems. Every intelligent species they had ever found had been conquered, broken, and made to serve. They did not think of themselves as cruel. They thought of themselves as necessary. The galaxy needed order, and they provided it. They called themselves the Overlords, and no one had ever proven them wrong. They were tall beings with gray skin and 4 arms. They lived for thousands of years and thought in terms of centuries the way humans think in terms of weeks. They had perfected faster-than-light travel when most current species were still learning to make fire. Their warships could crack planets open like eggs. Their weapons could burn the atmosphere off a world in hours. They had done this many times to species that refused to submit. Most species submitted. They had a process they called the quieting. When their scouts found a new intelligent species, they would watch and wait. They would study the species, learn its weaknesses, and calculate the perfect moment to strike. They always waited until the species was advanced enough to be useful as servants but not advanced enough to be a threat. Then the overlords would arrive with their fleets, demonstrate their power, and offer a choice: serve or die. In 11,000 years, every species had chosen to serve. The first detected humanity in what they called Cycle 847,291, a small observation probe, drifting through an unremarkable region of space, picked up radio signals coming from a yellow star. The signals were primitive and unencrypted, full of music and voices, and something the probe's translator identified as advertising. The observers were amused. Another young species, shouting into the void without knowing who might be listening. They sent a detailed report to the Dominion's central authority. A new species, calling itself humanity, had been found on the 3rd planet of a small solar system. The species was intelligent but primitive. They had only recently developed nuclear technology and had not yet left their home world in any meaningful way. They fought wars among themselves constantly. They could not even agree on a single government for their planet. The central authority reviewed the report and made a simple decision: wait. Humanity was not yet worth the effort of a quieting. In 3 or 4 centuries, when they had spread to other planets and become useful, the overlords would return. This was the first mistake. 53 years after first contact, they received an updated report that made no sense. The primitive species had developed faster-than-light travel. This should have been impossible. Species took centuries to make such advances, sometimes. Humanity had done it in decades. The central authority requested clarification. The observers confirmed their findings. Humanity had not just developed FTL travel, they had already begun colonizing other star systems. 3 colonies were established, with more being planned. The species was expanding at a rate they had never seen before. For the first time in a very long time, the central authority felt something like concern. They ordered an immediate quieting. The fleet they sent was not their largest, but it was more than sufficient. 300 warships, including 12 planet crackers, arrived at humanity's first colony, a world they called New Horizon. The admiral expected the usual sequence of events: a show of force, a demand for surrender, and then either submission or destruction. Simple, clean, efficient. What happened instead was chaos. The humans did not surrender. They did not even try to negotiate. The moment the fleet entered the system, human ships swarmed out from behind moons and asteroids, from places the overlords had not thought to check. The ships were small and crude, nothing compared to warships, but there were hundreds of them. They attacked in waves, sacrificing themselves to get close enough to fire their weapons. They destroyed them easily at first. Human ships exploded by the dozen, then by the 100. But for every ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to appear, and the humans were learning. With each wave, their tactics changed. They found weak points in the shields. They targeted communication arrays and sensor clusters. They flew directly into the engines of larger ships, killing themselves to cause damage. The admiral had never seen anything like it. Species did not fight like this. Species calculated their odds, recognized when they were beaten, and surrendered to save themselves. Humanity did none of these things. They fought with a fury that seemed almost insane, as if they would rather die than submit. The Battle of New Horizon lasted 3 days. When it was over, they had won, but the victory was hollow. They had lost 47 warships, more than they had lost in the previous 1,000 years combined. The human colony was destroyed, but the cost was unacceptable. The admiral sent a report to the Central Authority. Humanity is not like other species. They do not respond to superior force with submission. They respond with adaptation. Recommend full fleet deployment for extinction-level action. The Central Authority approved the request and began assembling a larger fleet. This would take time, even for but they were patient. They had always been patient. Humanity was not. In the 2 years it took to assemble their extinction fleet, humanity changed everything. They studied every piece of wreckage from the Battle of New Horizon. They reverse-engineered weapons and shields. They built new ships, better ships, ships that incorporated alien technology they had learned from their enemies' corpses. And they spread. By the time the extinction fleet arrived, humanity had grown from 3 colonies to 17. They had learned to hide their settlements, to build underground, to scatter their population so no single attack could destroy them all. They had also done something they did not expect. They had started talking to other species. The Dominion subject races had been quiet for. They served the Overlords because they had no other choice, because they believed resistance was impossible, because they had been taught that they could not be defeated. But now there was a species that was fighting back, a species that was surviving. The humans sent messages to anyone who would listen, telling them about New Horizon, about the 47 warships they had destroyed, about the possibility of freedom. Most subject species ignored the messages. They had been broken too long to remember hope, but some listened. Some remembered what it felt like to be free, and some began to wonder if the Overlords were really as invincible as they claimed. The extinction fleet found humanity's main settlement, a world called Haven, and began their assault. They expected the same desperate, suicidal defense they had seen at New Horizon. Instead, they found an empty planet. Humanity had evacuated completely, scattering to their hidden colonies across a dozen star systems. The admiral faced an impossible problem. He could not destroy an enemy he could not find. He could not chase ships that fled in every direction. He could not win a war against a species that refused to stand and fight. For the first time in 11,000 years, a military report contained a word that had never been used before: stalemate. The Overlords ruled all. They had always ruled all. But now there was a species that would not bow, would not break, would not die. A species that spread like fire and changed like water. A species that was teaching the galaxy's slaves a dangerous word: hope. The war that followed would last for centuries. It would reshape the galaxy, and it would begin the end of everything they had built. But that is a story for another time. The war between humanity and the Dominion lasted 47 years by human counting. To those who measured time in centuries, this was almost nothing. A brief unpleasantness, they told themselves at first. A minor disruption that would soon be corrected. They were wrong. Problem was simple. They did not understand how to fight an enemy like humanity. For 11,000 years, they had perfected the art of crushing civilizations. They knew how to break species that valued survival, that calculated odds, that understood when resistance was pointless. Every intelligent species they had encountered followed the same basic pattern. When faced with overwhelming force, they submitted. When their worlds were threatened, they negotiated. When their leaders were killed, they fell apart. Humanity did none of these things. The first year of the war taught that humans would not surrender. The second year taught them that humans would not stay dead. The third year taught them something even more disturbing. Humans learned faster than any species they had ever encountered. In the early battles, human ships were crude and weak. Their weapons barely scratched shields. Their armor melted under standard plasma fire. A single warship could destroy a dozen human vessels without difficulty. But each battle made humanity stronger. They captured enemy technology and studied it. They analyzed tactics and found ways to counter them. They built new weapons, new ships, new strategies. By the fifth year of the war, human ships were no longer easy targets. By the 10th year, they were dangerous. By the 20th year, they had stopped counting human ships as inferior. The Overlords adapted too, of course. They were not stupid. They changed their tactics, improved their weapons, learned from their defeats. But they changed slowly, carefully, after long debates among their commanders. Humanity changed fast, recklessly, sometimes in the middle of a battle. A strategy that worked against humans in the morning might fail completely by afternoon. One admiral wrote in his personal journal, "Fighting humans is like fighting water. You can push it, contain it, even boil it away. But it always finds a new shape, a new path, a new way to flow around your defenses. I do not know how to defeat an enemy that does not stay the same long enough to be understood." The admiral died 3 months later when a human strike team boarded his flagship. They had disguised their ship as debris from an earlier battle. No one had thought to check debris for life signs. But the military war was only part of the conflict. They faced a second enemy, one they understood even less than human adaptability. They faced human words. Humans talked. They talked constantly, compulsively, to anyone who would listen. They sent radio signals and data packets and recorded messages to every corner of the Dominion. They broadcast their victories and their defeats, their hopes and their fears. They told stories about themselves, about their history, about the time they had been slaves on their own world and had freed themselves. They asked a question that they had never allowed to be asked. What if things could be different? The subject species of the Dominion had been quiet for generations. They served because service was all they knew. They obeyed because disobedience meant death. They did not dream of freedom because freedom was not a concept they were permitted to have. They had been thorough in their conquests. They did not just defeat species. They erased their histories, their cultures, their memories of ever being free. But humans remembered, and they reminded everyone else. They were the first to act. They were a small species, reptilian and quick, who had served the Dominion for 600 years as laborers and miners. They worked in the deep places of conquered worlds, extracting metals and minerals for their masters. They had never caused trouble. They had never even complained. In the 23rd year of the war, they stopped working. Not all of them, not at once. It started on a single mining world where a group of workers simply refused to enter the tunnels. When the overseers demanded an explanation, they said nothing. They just stood there, silent and still, waiting. The overseers called for enforcers. The enforcers came and found that they had weapons. Crude things, barely functional, built in secret from scavenged parts. They were copies of human designs, transmitted in one of the endless broadcasts that humanity poured into space. The uprising was crushed. The rebels were killed, their world punished, their people reminded of the price of disobedience. But it was not the last uprising. It was only the first. The central authority faced a new problem. They could not fight humanity and police their empire at the same time. Every ship sent to chase human raiders was a ship that could not guard a subject world. Every soldier deployed to a distant battlefield was a soldier who could not suppress unrest at home. Humanity understood this. Humanity exploited it. Human agents appeared on Dominion worlds, teaching subject species how to build weapons, how to organize resistance, how to hide from their masters. They did not ask for anything in return. They did not demand loyalty or tribute. They simply helped, and then they disappeared. They tried to stop them. They increased surveillance, tightened security, executed anyone suspected of contact with humans. But they could not be everywhere. The Dominion was too large, too spread out, and humans were very good at not being found. By the 30th year of the war, the High Command made a decision. Humanity could not be defeated in detail. They could not be hunted system by system, colony by colony. The only solution was extinction. Total, complete, final extinction. They assembled the largest fleet in Dominion history, 12,000 warships, including the 3 remaining world-enders. These were ships so massive that they could crack a planet's crust with a single bombardment. They had been used only twice in history, both times to end species that had proven too troublesome to subjugate. Humanity would be the third. The fleet traveled to Sol, humanity's home system, expecting to find their enemy's last stand. Humans were sentimental, the new. They would defend there. They would gather their strength in one place for a final, desperate battle. They found nothing. Sol was empty. Earth was empty. Every station, every satellite, every ship was gone. Humanity had abandoned their home without a fight, scattering across the galaxy in thousands of directions. The Admiral stared at the empty system for a long time. He ran calculations in his head, trying to determine how many fleets it would take to chase down every human ship, every hidden colony, every secret base. The numbers did not work. Humanity had not fought to win, they had fought to survive, and they had succeeded. The Admiral sent his report to the Central Authority. It contained a single recommendation: negotiate. For the first time in 11,000 years, the Overlords had met an enemy they could not destroy. And that enemy was still out there, still spreading, still teaching the galaxy that they were not gods. They were just another species, and species could be defeated. The stalemate lasted 300 years. They did not surrender because they did not know how to surrender. They had never learned the word, never needed it. But they stopped attacking, stopped hunting, stopped trying to exterminate humanity. They pulled their fleets back to their core worlds and waited. Humanity did not stop. Humanity never stopped. They spread across the galaxy like seeds on the wind. Every year there were more colonies, more ships, more humans. They built underground on frozen moons. They carved cities into asteroids. They lived in space stations that drifted between stars. Wherever there was a place to hide, humans found it. Wherever there was a way to survive, humans took it. And they kept talking. They tried to block human transmissions. They jammed frequencies, destroyed relay stations, executed anyone caught listening to human broadcasts. But they could not stop the words from spreading. Humans were clever. They hid messages in trade data, in navigation beacons, in the static between authorized channels. The words leaked through every barrier the Dominion built. The words were simple. They said, "You do not have to live this way. You are not property. You can be free." Some species ignored the words. They had been slaves too long to imagine anything else. But others listened. Others remembered stories their grandparents had told, stories about a time before the Overlords came. Others began to dream. The Dominion started to crack. It happened slowly at first. A mining colony that stopped sending tribute. A factory world where production fell for no reason. A transport ship that vanished with its cargo. Small things, easy to explain, easy to ignore. Then the small things became big things. There were a warrior species who had served as soldiers for 2,000 years. They were proud, fierce, and absolutely loyal. They had crushed 100 uprisings on behalf of their masters. They were the Dominion's iron fist. In the 147th year of the stalemate, they stopped fighting. Not all of them, not immediately, but a growing number of soldiers began to question their orders. They asked why they were killing members of other species for the benefit of the. They asked what they were getting in return. They asked if this was really the only way to live. They responded as they always did, with force. They sent a fleet to remind them of their place. The fleet was met by ships that should have been fighting for the Dominion but were now fighting against it. The battle lasted 2 weeks. But the cost was enormous. And by the time it was over, 3 more species had declared independence. The Dominion was dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but dying nonetheless. It was dying because they had built their empire on fear, and fear only works when people believe you cannot be defeated. Humanity had shown that the Overlords could be fought. Humanity had shown that resistance was possible. Once people believe something is possible, you cannot make them unbelieve it. The High Command met in secret to discuss their options. Some argued for one final push, a desperate attempt to destroy humanity once and for all. But the mathematics had not changed. Humanity was too spread out, too numerous, too good at hiding. Extinction was no longer possible. Others argued for retreat, for pulling back to the oldest worlds and abandoning the outer territories. But this would mean giving up everything they had built, admitting that 11,000 years of conquest had been for nothing. In the end, they chose a third option. They chose to do something they had never done in their entire history. They chose to talk. The message was sent on every frequency humanity monitored. It was simple and direct. We wish to negotiate. Humanity's response came 3 days later. It said, "We have been waiting." The negotiations took place on a station in neutral space, a place that had once been a human colony before the war. They sent their oldest living, a being who had seen civilizations rise and fall across. Humanity sent a woman named Sarah, who was 43 years old and had been born on a hidden colony that they had never found. They looked at her with something like curiosity. Humans were small creatures, fragile, short-lived. This woman would be dead in another 50 years, while they might live for 50 more centuries. And yet here they sat, as equals, discussing the fate of a galaxy. "You have caused us a great deal of trouble," they said. Sarah smiled. "You tried to exterminate our species. You refused to submit." "Yes, we did." There was silent for a moment. In 11,000 years, no species had ever spoken to her this way. No species had ever sat across a table from them without fear in their eyes. This human woman was not afraid. She was calm, patient, almost amused. "What do you want?" they asked. "Freedom," Sarah said, "for us and for everyone else." "You ask us to give up our empire." "No, we ask you to change it. You can still exist. You can still be powerful, but you cannot own other species anymore. You cannot decide who lives and who dies. Those days are over." They considered this. Everything in history argued against acceptance. They had always ruled. They had always conquered. It was their nature, their purpose, their identity. But they was old enough to see what the younger could not. The Dominion was already falling apart. They could fight to preserve it and lose everything, or they could adapt and survive. "And if we refuse?" they asked. Sarah shrugged. "Then we keep doing what we've been doing. We keep spreading. We keep talking. We keep reminding every species in your empire that freedom is possible. It might take another 300 years. It might take 1,000. But eventually you will fall. The only question is whether you want to fall alone or change together." They looked at this small, fragile creature who would be dead before a child reached adolescence. And they understood something that had taken 3 centuries of war to teach. Humanity was not strong because of their weapons or their numbers. They were strong because they believed with absolute certainty that they would win. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. They believed it so completely that they made others believe it too. That kind of faith could not be defeated. It could only be joined. "Very well," they said, "we will discuss terms." The Treaty of Equivalence was signed 7 months later. It was not perfect. Many refused to accept it and had to be convinced by force. Many subject species did not trust it and had to be shown, over years and decades, that things had really changed. But change did come. Slowly, painfully, one world at a time. The Dominion did not end. It evolved into something new, something that no one had thought possible. Sarah did not live to see the full transformation. She died at 89, surrounded by her children, and on a world that had been hidden during the war and was now openly part of the galactic community. Her last words, according to her family, were, "We did it. We actually did it." She was wrong in a way. Humanity had not done it alone. They had shown the way, but every species that chose freedom, every world that demanded independence, every being who stood up and said no more had been part of it. But she was right, too. Humanity had started something that could not be stopped. They had taught the galaxy that the Overlords were not gods, that power was not permanent, that even the oldest chains could be broken. They lived for another 4,000 years after signing the treaty. In that time, they watched the galaxy change in ways that would have been unthinkable before. Species that had been enemies learned to work together. Worlds that had been battlefields became gardens. The old certainties crumbled, and something new grew in their place. Near the end, there was asked by a young student what humanity had taught them. They thought for a long moment. "They taught us that we were not as important as we thought," they said. "And they taught us that this was not a tragedy, it was a gift." The student did not understand. They did not explain. Some lessons take 11,000 years to unlearn.